Yo, what's up guys, it's your boy Sami here. Today we are gonna see, what if, to press Naruto X Part 1. Hope you'll enjoy this video. So before we start, please subscribe to our channel, and like this video. So let's get into the video. The baby laughs at the funny face being made by its father, sending drools flying everywhere, as it waves its chubby hands in the air. A mischievous young woman steals a tip from a recently deserted table. A fly buzzes quietly on the door to the restaurant, seemingly oblivious to the waitress approaching from behind with a rolled-up magazine. Ordinary things that a person usually ignores, but Naruto was aware of all of them mostly, because he was trying to avoid staring at the green-eyed woman sitting across the table. Hard to believe it's been half a year, huh? Sakura asked, chopsticks held lightly in her right hand. She and Naruto were currently grabbing dinner at a swanky new restaurant near the Hokage's mansion, relaxing after a grueling day of training with the Godin. Since the deaths of Sasuke and the Akatsuki, Tsunade had the two of them practically glued to her shapely hips, using whatever extra time she had available to teach them. More often than not, it involved the both of them reading old musky books and writing research papers on what they'd learned. Naruto smiled half-heartedly. He was used to this conversation. Since Sasuke died, right? Sakura nodded her head, a faraway look on her face. Do you think he really killed himself? The blonde frowned. He didn't want to sound cruel, but he was sick of thinking about their wayward former teammate. After the initial news of his suicide, Naruto had refused to believe it. Sasuke may have been a lot of things: traitorous, evil, crazy, possibly gay, but suicidal wasn't one of them. As time wore on, though, he'd begun to question his initial opinion. How much had he really known about Sasuke? Sure, he'd at one time considered the Uchiha one of his closest friends, but he'd only been around him for a little under a year, 3 months of which were spent completely ignoring the other. Besides, even when they had become actual friends, it wasn't like Sasuke had ever told him anything about his family besides how much he wanted to kill Itachi, anyway. No, he really didn't want to talk about him anymore. That part of his life was over. More importantly, he had something to ask the woman idly picking at her fish. He took a deep breath and slowly exhaled through his nose, deciding to take the plunge and get it over with. Nah, Sakura. If you're not doing anything tomorrow, you wanna go ice skating with me? The pond at the park's frozen over. Naruto bit the inside of his lip, trying hard not to look too interested. He thought there was a good chance that she'd accept his offer, but, as his perverted former sensei used to say, women are illogical and insane. Sakura looked surprised for a couple of seconds, but to his relief, she smiled and nodded. Sure. Oh, but we have to do it before 6. I have a date tomorrow night. The chopsticks in his hand clattered against the floor. His body suddenly went cold, and his ears burned with an intense fire. The plate in front of him began to blur in and out of focus, causing the recently eaten food to churn and rumble in his stomach. He felt sick. Naruto, you okay? I have to go to the bathroom, Naruto said, standing up suddenly. The only emotion he could feel was shock. The news had literally blindsided him. Although she was attractive, Sakura had always had an unapproachable air about her. In the academy, she was too shy and withdrawn for anyone to notice her. When she became a genin, she was a crazy Sasuke fangirl. As a medic nin serving directly under the Hokage, she was just fucking scary. Who the hell had enough balls to ask her out? No, a better question might be who was suicidal enough. He numbly pushed open the door to the bathroom. Luckily, it was empty. He could imagine what his face looked like at that moment. He walked up to the sink and stared into the mirror, confirming his assumption. He looked like shit. The blonde tiredly lowered his head. What did he expect? Did he really think that with Sasuke gone, Sakura would suddenly look at him? He should have known better. Just when he'd begun to believe that she was developing feelings for him. Just when he thought he finally found someone who really understood him and liked him for more than his social status or fighting ability. Logically, he knew that she didn't belong to him. He'd never been able to work up the courage to ask her out, and she'd never said that she wouldn't date anyone else. Somehow, though, he still felt betrayed. Naruto lifted his head to stare into the mirror again, remembering the words he'd been told by an Anbu officer when he was a child. Just grin and bear it. Things will be brighter tomorrow, kid. He didn't know who said them or why those simple words made him feel better, but they did. That's right. Just grin and bear it. It's how he'd gotten through 17 years of his life, and it hadn't failed him yet. With that, he slowly began to piece together his mask. He cleared his throat and pasted on a smile, staring into the mirror to make sure it was correct. Since Sakura had been his friend for nearly 5 years now, his smile would have to be impeccable. Otherwise, she'd notice right away if something was bothering him. Satisfied that she wouldn't see through his grin, he took a deep calming breath and headed back out to the dining room. He eased himself into his seat, doing his best not to look her directly in the eye. It was easy to put on a smile to hide his frown, but it was much harder to hide the look of anger and betrayal in his eyes. Are you alright? Sakura asked again, green eyes furrowed and concerned. Naruto bit back his shock. He was surprised that she was able to see the crack in his smile so easily. After a little thought, though, he realized that she may just be asking because he'd left suddenly. It was okay. She hadn't actually noticed anything. Yeah, just tired. I had a long day. The medic nin stared at him for a few seconds, trying to figure out exactly what was going on. He wouldn't look her directly in the eye, and his posture looked more slumped than usual. Giving up, Sakura leaned back and placed her chopsticks on the table. Why didn't you say so? We can go home if you'd like. As if he'd been waiting for those words all night, Naruto quickly stood to his feet and reached for his wallet. We probably should. He felt his voice waver. Not good. Wanting to get out of there as fast as he could, he tossed a few bills on the table and walked towards the door. Naruto, wait up. Sakura called, digging through her purse for her wallet. Unfortunately, the blonde was already out of the restaurant, resisting the urge to run home. He didn't want to be around Sakura for another second. The feel of her hand on his shoulder almost made him vomit. Hey, what's the rush? He paused momentarily, debating whether or not to turn around. If he didn't turn around, she'd know for sure that something was up, but if he did turn around, he might not be able to keep his smile from crumbling. I'm just really tired. I want to get some sleep, he said, cursing himself for stuttering. Feeling his fatigue, she allowed her hand to slip from his shoulder. Well, good night then, Naruto, she said, jade eyes still furrowed with concern. Unable to bring himself to answer, Naruto simply walked off towards his apartment, leaving a confused Sakura in his wake. Naruto trudged up the wooden stairs to his apartment, feet making a hollow thumping sound with each step. He wanted nothing more than to fall face first onto his bed and forget everything. Forget about stupid Sakura, forget about her stupid date, and while he was at it, forget about his stupid life. It's about time you got here, Uzumaki. Naruto snapped his head up to see an angry young woman standing in front of his apartment, arms crossed, and a travel pack hanging from her shoulders. A black duffel bag sat at her feet, spiking his curiosity as to her intentions. Finally finding his voice, he deepened his frown and leveled his gaze on the woman. What do you want, Ino? The kunoichi averted her gaze, instantly putting her fellow blonde on edge. That was never a good sign. Let me crash here for a couple of nights. You're the only one I know who has their own place, and my parents would never think to look for me here. He thought about it for all of 2 milliseconds. No. Shoving her out of the way, he jammed his key into the lock and opened the door. Just as he was about to close it behind him, Ino forced her foot in the doorway. Why not? Sakura told me that you have 2 bedrooms in this place, so it's not like I'll be in your way. She noticed his face crumble at the mention of Sakura and instantly felt a little bad for him. He looked like a lost puppy who'd just been separated from his mother. Hey, you alright? Go home. I'm not gonna take care of you. He kicked her foot out of the doorway and tried to close the door again, only to have Ino slide her torso halfway into his apartment. He was so shocked by her near-suicidal move that he paused for a second, giving her a chance to get one final word in. Dinner, she said, looking him straight in the eyes. A little caught off guard by the word, Naruto raised his eyebrows. What? Seeing that she had his attention, she quickly continued. I'll buy groceries and make you dinner every night for as long as I'm here. Can you even cook? Ino recoiled, as if she'd been slapped, mouth opening in a shocked "Oh. Are you serious? What makes you think that I can't cook?" Naruto frowned. You don't seem like the useful type. Move it. Ino forced the door open and elbowed him out of the way. She looked around his apartment with disdain, mouth screwing up in obvious disappointment. It's smaller than I thought, and dirty. I guess it's better than those cheap motels on the south side of the village, though. Your kitchen's at the end of the hall, right? Without waiting for his answer, she skipped around the corner to the kitchen. Once there, she opened his refrigerator and stuck her head inside, only to find little more than a carton of milk and a few eggs. This is all you have. Naruto sighed loudly, feeling fatigue begin to claw at his body. After all he'd gone through that day, he didn't have the energy to argue with her. Letting the girl sleep in his place for the night wouldn't kill him. He closed the door and trudged down the hall towards his bedroom, loosening his clothing as he went. Noticing his departure, Ino pulled her head out of the refrigerator. So, can I stay? She yelled. No? He slammed the bedroom door behind him and fell limply on his bed, just barely slipping out of his clothes. He faintly heard the front door open and close, signaling the girl's departure. It was a bit surprising that Ino had given up so easily, but judging by the look on her face when she'd first stepped into his apartment, she wasn't too keen on staying anyway. He felt a little bad for not letting her stay since she had nowhere else to go, but hell, she was a shinobi. She could easily find a safe place to camp out in Konoha. Besides, the last thing he needed was a loudmouth, spoiled princess hanging around when he was feeling so shitty. Putting the Yamanaka out of his mind, Naruto slowly shut his eyes, silently praying to Kami-sama that tomorrow would be brighter. Naruto woke with a start, body tense, and wet with perspiration. His heart beat at 1,000 miles per second, threatening to pop out of his chest. A nightmare. He wasn't a stranger to waking up this way, not by a long shot. His childhood was filled with these kinds of mornings, and though they'd lessened over time, they had never completely gone away. Unlike usual, though, he could barely remember what had happened in his dream. The only two things that had managed to stick with him were a scream and a pair of blood-red eyes, both of which left him feeling more than a little sick to his stomach. He took a few more minutes to catch his breath before slowly rolling out of bed to start his day. He didn't really have anything to do. His initial plan had been to go ice skating with Sakura since it was his day off, but there was no way he could face her after what had happened the night before. Not without breaking down in front of her. Naruto slipped on a pair of loose brown shorts and a white t-shirt. He hadn't showered last night, but it didn't matter. It wasn't like he was planning on leaving his apartment. Deciding that he'd better at least eat something, Naruto trudged into his kitchen to see what he could find. If he remembered correctly, he still had a few cups of ramen in the cupboard and a couple of eggs left in the fridge. To his surprise, there was already someone standing in his kitchen. It took a few seconds, but he was eventually able to remember that Ino had asked to stay at his place for the night. Even though he thought he'd refuse her, the woman apparently didn't know how to listen. He watched as Ino worked over his stove, seemingly unaware of his presence. She wore a loose white tank top over her torso, and a pair of baggy gray sweatpants adorned her legs. Her long blonde hair was pulled back in her usual ponytail, but unlike her usual hairstyle, the long bang that usually hung in front of her right eye seemed to also be pulled back away from her face. "What do you think you're doing?" Naruto asked, eyes groggy and red as he stared at her. She glanced over her shoulder and glared at him as if it was obvious. "Making breakfast. I went out and bought some groceries. I figured that since I couldn't make you dinner last night, I should make it up by cooking breakfast. Sit down." He frowned in her direction, unsure of how to take her explanation. Her tone had been harsh and demeaning, and she wasn't supposed to be here, but she was cooking him breakfast. Since it didn't smell too bad, and he really wasn't in the mood for ramen at the moment, a rarity that he chalked up to his current emotional state, he decided to plop down in one of the two chairs sitting in the kitchen. He could kick her out after he finished eating. Ino set the table, placing a variety of dishes he'd only ever had in restaurants in front of him. She poured them both a cup of tea before seating herself in the chair opposite him, clasping her hands together and bowing her head. "Itadakimasu." Picking up his chopsticks, Naruto dipped his utensils into his rice bowl and brought them up to his face, discreetly checking the food to make sure everything was in order. He didn't believe she'd actually poison him, but it was more of a habit than anything. He'd learned his lesson after a certain incident involving a certain perverted hermit and a certain hooker at a certain brothel in a certain Earth country town. Yeah, that hadn't been very fun. Deciding that the food was safe, he shoveled some rice and vegetables into his mouth. Surprisingly enough, it didn't taste half bad. He packed in another mouthful, finding that it was getting better and better with each bite. Still, although the food was good, he couldn't let Ino stay with him, just because she could cook a little. Placing his chopsticks on the table, he leveled his gaze on the kunoichi. "Would you run away from home? Right to the point, aren't you?" She joked, smirking at him. When his face remained unamused, she sighed and answered his question. "Well, you know how my dad works in terror and interrogation." Naruto didn't say anything, so she continued. "I asked him to help me get in, and he said that, as long as I was under his roof he wouldn't allow me to apply. Apparently, it's too rough for a young woman of my constitution. Can you believe that shit? It's a total double standard." Naruto spared her a deadpan stare. That's it when someone tells you that you can't do something, don't you get upset? I mean, where does he get off saying that it's too tough for me?" Her eyes were angry and wide, and her mouth was twisted into a vicious scowl. "He works in torture and interrogation, and he's your father. I think he'd know." Ino shot him a glare. "Shut up." They ate in silence for a few minutes, neither of them all that interested in speaking with the other. Every now and then the kunoichi would glance up at Naruto, curiously studying him in an attempt to figure out why the village's loudest shinobi was so quiet. Unable to take it anymore, she slammed her chopsticks down on the table. "What's with you? You're not acting like Mr. Sunshine and Rainbows today." He gave her a tired, sarcastic smile before going back to his food. He wasn't terribly hungry, but he had to admit that the girl could cook. Damn, could she cook. It almost amazed him that a headstrong, annoying girl like Ino knew anything about housework, and it wasn't long before he was wolfing the rest of his meal down. Ino watched him eat with a knowing smile, more than a little pleased that he seemed to be enjoying himself. If the way to a man's heart was through his stomach, then she had a good chance of convincing him to put her up for more than the few days she'd initially suggested. She didn't know how long this cold war with her father would last, but she figured it'd be at least a couple of weeks before he finally caved. "Good?" she asked, trying, as hard as she could not to sound smug. Naruto glared at her from over his cup of tea, finishing the drink before setting it back down on the table. It briefly occurred to him that this was the first time he'd seen her right eye, since he'd left for his 3-year training trip with Jiraiya. It was okay. He stood from the table with his dishes, dropping them into the sink noisily. The woman bit back a laugh. He was so dishonest that it was almost cute. I'm glad you liked it. He grunted a response, and headed to the bathroom to wash up. Unfortunately, he wasn't quite prepared for the sight that met him. His sink was literally covered with different and strange-looking bottles, most of them in funny shapes he hadn't known existed until now. It smelled distinctly of wildflowers, a scent he actually didn't mind too much. The thing that did bother him was how comfortable she'd gotten in his apartment in only one night. If he didn't know any better, he'd say that she was planning on staying longer than the few days she'd asked for. He debated whether or not to confront her about it, but at the moment, he really didn't feel like dealing with it. He was still feeling depressed about Sakura's betrayal, and all he wanted to do was mope around his apartment until he felt better. Sure, it wasn't the most effective plan, but doing anything else seemed too troublesome. Maybe this was how Shikamaru used to feel before Suma died. After brushing his teeth and washing his face, he dragged himself out to the living room and flopped down on his couch, letting loose a heavy sigh. Seriously, what's up with you? Ino asked from the kitchen. I haven't seen you this upset since Shiraya-sama. She quickly shut her mouth, noticing the way Naruto's face took on an even darker look. It doesn't have anything to do with you. Undeterred, Ino pressed on. Is it Tsunade-sama? Kakashi? Sasuke? Sakura? When Naruto's face soured, she rolled her eyes. Sakura, huh? Should have known. It's always about Sakura. She frowned in thought. What could Sakura have done to piss Naruto off so much? The only thing she could think of that would make him this upset is if Sakura went back to Sasuke after all that had happened. Since Sasuke was dead, it had to mean that he'd found about. The date. Ino said, not realizing that she was speaking out loud. Naruto snapped his head around to stare at her, shock prevalent on his face. You know about it. Sakura's like my best friend. Of course I know about it. Do you know who she's going on a date with? The girl smirked inwardly. This was it. This was the exact situation she'd been waiting for. A situation that could give her leverage. Well, I could tell you, but... Not realizing that he was falling into her trap, Naruto leaned forward with wide eyes. But what? In exchange you have to let me stay here for a week. Naruto blinked. A week. Living with Ino. The thought alone sent shudders down his spine. She'd already conquered his bathroom. What else would she take over before she was satisfied? His kitchen. His living room. Still, curiosity was killing him, and he usually only came home to eat and sleep anyway. It wasn't like he'd be running into her very often. Sighing in resignation, he glared at the bossy Kanoichi. Do I still get dinner? If he was gonna admit defeat, he wouldn't let her feel the satisfaction of completely getting one over on him. The woman smirked and nodded, smelling victory. Of course. Fine, but only a week. After that, you're gone. No exceptions. The woman rolled her eyes. I know. So? Ino's grin dropped slightly, and her face took on a mildly apologetic look. She's going on a date with Sai. She furrowed her brows when Naruto's mouth dropped open. Perhaps telling him was a little more than he could handle. After a few silent seconds, the young man was finally able to find his voice again. Sai the Sai on our team. It surprised me too. Naruto's lip curled angrily, baring his fanged teeth for Ino to see. That backstabbing. So, what are you gonna do? Find him, and beat him up for going on a date with a single available girl. He felt his anger deflate slightly. She had a point. But this is different. He knows how I feel about Sakura-chan. If you felt that strongly about her, you would have asked her out already. Ino snorted when his face fell. He was starting to look pathetic. However, she really didn't want to stay with a guy who moped around about one stupid girl. Sighing loudly, she crossed her arms and cocked her hip. Look, it's just a date. I've been on 2 dates with the guy, and trust me, he doesn't have much to offer besides a pretty face. What, and you didn't marry him? Naruto bitterly asked. Ino frowned. Despite what you may think about me, looks aren't the only thing I look for in a guy. They have to have ambition, a personality, and treat me like I'm the only girl in their world. Settling for less isn't an option. So you want to be a princess? I'm trying to cheer you up, and you're throwing it back in my face. No one asked you to cheer me up. Ino bit her lip harder than she ever had in her life. Every bone in her body was screaming for her to rip into him, demeaning and insulting him until there was nothing left of his small, pathetic ego. However, since she was living in his apartment for the time being, and had no other friends to stay with, she decided to simply turn around and walk away before she said or did something she'd regret. Naruto watched her leave with a sigh. She just happened to choose the worst possible time to show up at his doorstep. He didn't feel particularly bad about snapping at her. It was her fault for poking her nose where it didn't belong, and if it kept her out of his business, and if he was lucky, apartment, then he was alright with playing the bad guy. Out of the corner of his eye he saw Ino, fully dressed in her usual shinobi garb, leave the apartment. She didn't bother to even glance his way, something that suited him fine. He leaned back on the couch, and sighed again. Now he had to figure out what to do about Sakura. Solitary confinement, the breaking point, the effects of sensory deprivation. Ino, what is all of this? Sakura asked, staring down at the books Ino was steadily piling up in her arms. The blonde let loose a short breath of annoyance, already seeing where this conversation was going. The two of them were currently in the Konoha library, pursuing stacks upon stacks of seemingly endless amounts of books. Each of them already had an armful of material, and the Yamanakas showed no signs of slowing down. I'm going to apply for employment within the terror and interrogation department, Ino mumbled. Eyes instantly lighting up, Sakura nudged her friend in the shoulder with a grin. Your dad approved, Ino, that's awesome. When Ino averted her gaze, Sakura's excitement dropped. Your dad didn't approve. The blonde grabbed another book from the shelf and huffed. He can't control my life. You're still living at home, so technically, he can, Sakura said, raising an eyebrow. For the second time Ino avoided the medic nin's eyes, instantly worrying her friend. You're still living at home, aren't you? When she didn't answer, Sakura put her books down on a table and crossed her arms in front of her. Ino, where are you staying? Exasperated, Ino also set her books down. Would you stop trying to pry into every detail of my life? Sakura wisely backed away, staring at her friend with concern. It was normal for Ino to be bitchy, but she was quickly moving into the realm of actual anger. Are you okay? The blind sighed and rubbed her forehead with her palm, forcing herself to calm down, lest she do something she regretted. Even though Sakura was being annoying, it was only because she cared. I'm just stressed. Obviously. Ino shot Sakura a playful glare before seating herself at the table and reaching for a book. She'd initially planned to hop into the minds of some of the lower-level employees in the terror and interrogation department to get an idea of what was on the test. But after her falling out with her father, she decided to show both him and herself that she could do it on her own without help from her clan's abilities. She gathered the books based on the information she'd managed to glean from her father over the years. From what she could tell, the most important thing about working in interrogation was knowing how to deal with each individual criminal. It relied on her being able to find and exploit a person's weak point within hours, a skill that took years to perfect. Not that she was actually expecting to be allowed to interrogate prisoners right away. She'd probably be relegated to desk duty or something for a few years, and after that, they'd make her a prison guard. If she was lucky, she'd be able to get to the good stuff at the 5-year mark. For nearly half an hour, Ino read over the books she picked out, every now and then pausing to write down the points that she felt were most important. Eventually her mind began to wander, and before long, she found herself thinking about Naruto. She was still a little pissed at him for taking his anger out on her, but she could sort of understand his pain. Sai had stolen Sakura out from under him, and despite what she told him the day before, she had to admit that it was an incredibly bitch move. It annoyed her, but she was getting less and less upset with Naruto. Remembering his sullen face, she winced and raised her eyes to look at Sakura. So, just out of curiosity, why did you agree to go out with Sai? She asked, trying not to sound too interested. Without even looking up from her own book, Sakura shrugged. Because he asked me. Did you change your mind about me dating him? I'll cancel if it bugs you. No, it's not that. I'm just curious. You're his teammate, you know better than anyone what he's like. Sakura shrugged her shoulders again. I know, but it's only fair that I give the guy a chance. Who knows? He might have this whole other, deeper side to him. They stared at each for a few seconds before simultaneously bursting into laughter. Sakura was the first to get a grip on herself, and wiping the tears from the corners of her eyes, she continued. But seriously, he offered to pay, and it was a free meal. Are you sure you're alright with it? Ino nodded and smirked. She didn't particularly know why, but she was relieved to hear that Sakura didn't feel anything for Sai. Positive. Now, help me study. Slipping on a huge t-shirt and tying her hair up into a loose ponytail, Ino sighed in dismay as she looked around her large room. Naruto's guest bedroom was dead empty save for a few of his books and scrolls that she'd thrown into the closet. There was no dresser, no mirror, no bed, nothing. The idiot didn't even have an extra futon, giving her a clear picture of how often guests stayed over at his apartment. Luckily, she had the foresight to pack her sleeping bag, just in case she wasn't able to find a place to sleep for the night and had to camp outside somewhere. She glanced over at her travel pack resting snugly against the wall. Thanks to the effective packing techniques they'd learned in the academy, she had enough clothing to last her for around 2 weeks barring any unforeseen circumstances, anyway. She had yet to find a laundromat in the area, but it wasn't like she'd been looking all that hard. If things between her and Naruto ever improved, she could always ask him where he did his laundry. Sighing loudly, she pushed herself to her feet and stretched her arms toward the ceiling. She was tired from studying all day, but she still had to hold up her end of the deal by cooking dinner. Naruto didn't seem particularly picky about what he ate, so she could throw something together, and he'd probably be satisfied with it. Ino shuffled out of her room towards the kitchen, dark gray sweepants dragging the ground. She glanced towards the couch to see that Naruto hadn't moved an inch since she'd gotten home from the library. Hell, as far as she knew, he hadn't even moved since she'd left that morning. She rolled her eyes and opened the refrigerator, sighing again, as she put together a meal in her mind. Since she bought fish on sale the day before, and it was due to expire the next day, she decided to cook it first. She also grabbed an armful of vegetables, and chopped them up to make a simple side dish, sautéing them in one of his seemingly barely used frying pans. As she cooked, her eyes occasionally strayed to her fellow blonde staring blankly at the wall. She couldn't really understand what he was so bummed about. Sure, the girl he liked was going on a date with another guy, but it wasn't like they were getting married or anything. Over 80% of all relationships were destined to fail, and since the guy she was dating was Sai, that percentage jumped to 99%. If it was anything like her own dates with him, Sakura probably wouldn't even get through the first 10 minutes before sending the black-haired boy through a wall. Ino shook her head, exasperated with herself for even caring. She had enough problems of her own without worrying about Naruto's. She turned off the stove, and poured the soup into a couple of bowls. It was only a simple meal of rice, miso soup, sautéed fish, and vegetables, but it was probably more than enough to make him happy. "You can eat," Ino called from his table, already seated. She gave him a few seconds, but when he didn't move, she frowned and narrowed her eyes. "Uzumaki. Come eat. Now." He looked over, and gave her a look that clearly said, "Seriously." Not budging, she pointed to his seat, and deepened her glare. They held a fierce staring contest for a few seconds, neither willing to back down. Unfortunately, Naruto's stomach chose that exact moment to growl loudly, pretty much costing him the battle. He grudgingly stood to his feet, and walked over to his seat, ignoring the triumphant smirk Ino was sending his way. After plopping down in his chair, he grabbed his chopsticks, and began to eat, not bothering to say grace or even thank her for the food. As soon as Naruto placed a piece of the fish into his mouth, his taste buds exploded with flavor. The meal hadn't looked like much at first glance, but just like the night before, Ino had managed to make something that actually tastes good. The surprise must have shown on his face because the woman sitting across from him leaned forward with a knowing grin. "Good." Naruto scowled, and looked away, annoyed that he'd allowed her to read him so easily. "Why do you keep asking that? Shouldn't you know if the food you cooked is edible?" He grumbled. "It boosts my ego, and assures me that my taste buds haven't gone to shit." When Naruto smirked, she gasped exaggeratedly, and widened her eyes. "What's this?" Mr. Mopi finally cracked a smile. She teased, adjusting her voice to sound, as if she were a kindergarten teacher conversing with a student. "Shut up." Despite his harsh words, both his face and tone betrayed his true feelings. It was obvious that his mood had improved since that morning, and it further proved her mother's theory that all men needed to be happy was good food and sex. Unfortunately for Naruto, all he'd ever be able to get is the good food part. A low mumble snapped her out of her thoughts, and she glanced up to see Naruto staring down into his bowl of soup. "What?" she asked, curiously tilting her head. Naruto shifted uncomfortably, refusing to look her in the eyes. "Sorry." Ino, pleasantly surprised that he'd had the decency to apologize, smiled and shook her head. "It's okay." "What are you doing?" Naruto asked, yawning, as he scratched at his unruly blonde hair. Ino was lying back on his couch in a pair of shorts and a t-shirt, bare legs propped up on a huge pile of books. Her face was screwed up in concentration, as she read, light blue eyes narrowed into determined slits. Unwittingly, his eyes traced the smooth contours of her thighs before quickly darting back up to her face. "Studying. For what?" "To apply for the torture and interrogation department. I have to score at least an 80 to even try out." "Ouch," Naruto mumbled, visibly wincing. "You're telling me." "Breakfast is on the table if you want it," she said, waving towards his small dining room. Naruto glanced over to see that there were a few dishes littering his table, a sheet of plastic wrap draped over them to presumably keep any bugs or dust from getting into food. "Breakfast? I thought the deal was just for dinner." Ino shrugged her shoulders. "Don't get used to it or anything. My mom usually cooks at home, so I wanted to use this chance to work on my cooking skills a bit. Think of yourself as my guinea pig." In truth, she'd actually been pleased that her cooking had managed to cheer him up. It wasn't often that she was appreciated for, well, anything, and it was a surprisingly good feeling. Wanting to feel more of it, she had woken up half an hour early, just so that she'd have a little time to throw something together for him. "Thanks." For the first time since they'd begun speaking, Ino dropped her book to her lap to shoot him a shocked expression. "What? Thanks. I guess you're feeling better about Sakura." Naruto's face noticeably darkened. "I was." Sighing for what felt like the millionth time that week, Ino rolled her eyes. "It was seriously just a date, Uzumaki. I talked to Sakura yesterday, and she saw it as more of a free meal than anything." "Really? Really? Like I said, I've dated the guy. Even you have more to offer personality-wise than he does." Naruto scowled. "Hey." Ino ducked behind her book, hiding her smile from view. Just as quickly, she wiped the smile from her face completely. What the hell was she acting coy for? Besides the bone-chilling fact that it was Naruto, the idiot probably wouldn't even realize what she was doing. Shaking her head, she chalked it up to habit, and returned to her book, fully intending to block her fellow out of her mind. Unfortunately, she was only able to get 10 or so minutes of silence before he spoke again. I wonder how her date went. Groaning, Ino slammed her book down into her lap. You're seriously way too obsessed with forehead, you know that. Despite herself, she felt a wry smirk appear on her face. But, it's kind of sweet how fixated you are on her. In a creepy, overbearing kind of way. Naruto paused momentarily, seemingly thinking her statement over. After a couple of seconds, he narrowed his piercing blue, and leaned forward. Are you insulting or complimenting me? Both. Good to know. He stood from the table, and put his dishes in the sink. I have to meet with Bot-chan today, and probably won't be back until late. Lock the door if you leave. Without sparing him another glance from over her book, Ino lifted a hand, and threw him a half-hearted salute. Roger that. Say that again. Standing in the office of the goddamn Hokage, Naruto was flabbergasted. He had initially assumed that she just wanted him to run errands or something, but unfortunately, it turned out to be more than that. Much, much more. Hoping he misheard her, he eagerly awaited a reply. I want you to take the application test for the torture and interrogation department next week, Tsunade repeated, glaring at him from over her threaded fingers. What? Why do I have to take it too? Tsunade furrowed her brows. Too? Whoops. Ino had wanted to keep that a secret. If Tsunade knew about Ino's dad refusing to allow her to take the exam, she may also try to get in her way. Even worse, the Hokage might start asking questions about how he was involved with the Yamanaka, and that could lead to a very, very unpleasant situation. I'm not interested in torture or interrogation at all, though. Naruto yelled, quickly circumnavigating her question. Dotting frowned. The more you understand about Konoha's internal affairs, the better prepared you'll be if you somehow manage to become the Hokage. I also want you to get a legitimate score. You don't have to pass it, but I expect you to get at least 70. Naruto's jaw dropped. A 70 that was only 10 points lower than the score needed to pass. Even worse, he'd never been good at tests. The Chunin exams were a tremendous reminder of this. She handed him a flat manila envelope, glaring straight into his eyes, as she did so. Got it. Frowning, he scrunched up his face, and nodded, snatching the envelope out of her hand. It wasn't like he really had a choice in the matter. Fine. Good. Now get out of my sight. He stuck his tongue out at her, and turned on his heel, annoyed that she was making him do something so unreasonable. He could kind of understand her point of view, but at the same time, he really didn't want to spend the next week poring over dozens of books. He'd much rather be out on an A-rank mission or training. Just, as he was exiting the office, a bright pink blob entered his peripheral vision. Groaning inwardly, he recognized the blob as Sakura. Naruto. Hey. She said, popping up in front of him. Her bright green eyes sparkled, as she looked up at him, making the blonde's heart jump painfully in his chest. I haven't seen you around lately. Is everything alright? Yeah, everything's fine. Naruto said, smiling wide, and eyes closed into slits. Sakura frowned, and tilted her head. There was obviously something up with him, but if he wasn't going to spill, there was no point in prodding him any further. When he wanted to, Naruto could be a cast iron safe. Well, alright then. Wanna grab lunch? Normally, he'd have jumped all over her offer. Normally, there was nothing that would stop him from joining her for a meal. However, things were hardly normal between them. Avoiding her gaze, he declined. I had a big breakfast. Which was the truth. Ino hadn't held back at all, and since she'd gone through the trouble to make it for him, he felt obligated to finish everything. Sakura lifted an eyebrow. What, 10 bowls of ramen? Naruto, that stuff is loaded in sodium. It'll kill you if you keep eating it like that. She reached out towards his face, but to her surprise, Naruto edged out of her reach. I'd better start studying if I want to get a 70 on that test, he mumbled, turning in the direction of the Konoha library. Are you avoiding me? Sakura asked, staring at his back, as he began to walk away. Just because I have a life of my own doesn't mean that I'm avoiding you. The Kunoichi's eyes widened in surprise. Naruto had never taken such a cold tone with her before. Now she was sure of it, there was definitely something wrong with him, and it was only a matter of time before she found out what it was. Naruto opened the door to his apartment, both mentally and physically tired from the hours he'd spent combing the library for the books on the list Tsunade had given him. Half of them had already been checked out the day before, and after a little thought, he realized that it was probably Ino who had grabbed most of them. Hearing him come in, Ino popped her head out from the kitchen. Uzumaki, dinner's holy crap. She stared in surprise at the huge stack of books in his arms, not expecting Naruto of all people to be interested in studying. What are all those for? Naruto snorted and frowned. Yeah, you know that test you're taking. Bot-chan's making me take it too. No way. Do you have any idea how tough it is? Ino asked, visibly shocked by his admission. No, but thanks for helping to build my confidence. I feel so much better about it now. On the bright side, I now have all the books that I need, she said, digging through his stack. Can you believe there's a 10-book checkout limit? He glanced at the books littering his coffee table, and raised his eyebrows. But you have, like, 20. Sakura checked out some books for me under her name. This is seriously great, though. We can study together. Naruto rolled his eyes. Woohoo. Ino stopped looking through his books to glare up at him. You're a real downer, you know that. You're the one who's excited about studying. At least I'm trying to achieve my dream. And I'm not. Well, I'm not crying about having to study for things I'll have to know anyway. You were just crying about it this morning. Was not. We're two. Was not. We're two. Was not. We're two. Was not times 1,000. We're two times 1,000,000. We're not times infinitely. We're two times triple infinity plus 1. Was Ino pause and blinked. What am I, 6? Look at what you're making me do. You started it. Did not. Did two. Did not. Did two. Did not. Did Ino stamped her foot, annoyed that she gotten drawn in by him again. Damn it, Uzumaki, would you stop being so immature despite her words, though she had to admit that it was sort of fun arguing about nothing for once. The food's getting cold. Naruto grumbled and set his books down on the coffee table along with Ino's. He then sat down at the table, picking up his chopsticks and digging into his dinner. As soon as he took the first bite, he put down his chopsticks and stared down at his bowl. What is this? He asked, eyes wide and face incredulous. The question had apparently come off the wrong way, as Ino frowned and glared at him. If you don't like it, don't eat it. But I like it. I want to know what it is. Ino sat back a little, presumably in surprise. Oh. It's called katsudon. It has pork, egg, rice, and a bunch of different spices you don't have in your kitchen. Seriously, how the hell have you survived until now without even salt? And how have you never had katsudon? Naruto shrugged and shoved another mouthful of food down his throat, brushing off her question. This is really good. She watched him eat in fascination. To her, it tasted average at best. She'd never considered her cooking skills to be anything amazing, but the way he was wolfing it down made her feel incredibly good. She actually kind of liked cooking when it was so greatly appreciated. Raising his eyes to stare at her, Naruto frowned. Aren't you gonna eat? Huh? Oh, yeah, she stuttered, a bit embarrassed that she'd been caught. She picked up her utensils and began to eat, trying as hard as she could not to watch Naruto. You know, you're not as bad as I thought you were, Naruto said after a few minutes of silence. Ino lowered her chopsticks and tilted her head in curiosity. Bad. Like, I don't know, bitchy. Loud. Annoying. Self-centered. Hateful. I get the point. Thanks for having such a low opinion of me, she grumbled, face showing her displeasure. Hey, I'm just going by what I saw at the academy. After we were split into teams, we didn't really see each other anymore, and when we did, it was either with the rest of the Konoha 12, or for only a few minutes here and there. It's not like we've ever really had a conversation until now. Looking back, she realized that Naruto was right. She'd always considered him as sort of a friend, but how good of a friend would she be if she didn't even talk to him? In fact, everything she knew about the teen was learned from Sakura, and that wasn't exactly the most legitimate of sources. It's not too late to get to know each other. She put down her chopsticks and extended her hand across the table. Hi, I'm Yamanaka Ino. Naruto stared at her hand for a few seconds, seemingly confused by the sudden gesture. Eventually his face broke out into a wide grin, and he tightly gripped her hand in his. Uzumaki Naruto. Thanks for watching my video, leave a like if you enjoyed my video, and also do consider subscribing to my channel for more awesome content. See you next time, till then sayonara.